My name's Kirk Warren. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Alaska Energy Authority. I don't have bios for our presenters, but I'm happy to introduce the distinguished panelists. I do have the pleasure of actually working on a daily basis with Dave Lockard, but I'll still let him introduce himself. Three presenters. Mr. Del Conrad works with the Rural Alaska Fuel Service. He'll be presenting on issues plaguing rural Alaskan tank farms. Mr. Lockard will be presenting bulk fuel tank farm conditions. And Chloe Cotton with the Denali Commission will be presenting Denali Commission's investment in bulk fuel improvements. I do have a few housekeeping items for the engineers in the rooms or others that can get continuing education units. I have some forms up here you can fill out at the end, and I'll be happy to sign them. Also, for those of you that would like to attend the reception this evening, there will be a bus out front running continuously from 5:45 to 8 to take you over to Doyon. So without further ado, Mr. Conrad.
Hello. There we go.
And I have this.
Excellent. If I can just figure out how to use it. So, I'm the CEO of Rural Alaska Fuel Services, just to give a little background. Frankly, I have to keep looking over here because I can't see my presentation without that, so I apologize. Rural Alaska Fuel Services was founded, became operational actually 12 years ago today. And my first day on the job, I had to do a presentation at the Rural Energy Conference in Talkeetna, so there's sort of a symmetry to it all. What we're going to be talking about today, if I can figure out how to make it work. What is happening? There we go. Nope, went the wrong way.
That's going to make it a little harder.
That's going to make it real difficult. There we go.
All right.
But it's not moving. This one. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today, first of all, I want to give you a little background into what Rural Alaska Fuel Services is. And then I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we see in rural Alaska in the tank farm environments that we work with. And I just focused on about 3 or 4 of the major issues that we see, and so I'd like to go through those. First, what is RAFS? We were organized in 2004 by the Denali Commission to assist rural communities in managing their bulk fuel tank farms. We were set up as a not-for-profit corporation. And the reason that they set us up was that the Denali Commission established what they called their sustainability requirements. And that said that you had to follow all the state and federal regulations. You had to demonstrate the financial ability to run your facility. You had to set up renewal and replacement funds. And there were a lot of communities that just didn't know how to do that. So the solution that Denali Commission arrived at was let's set up an organization whose purpose will be to work with those communities. So what do? We work with communities in tank farm operations area. We do a lot of training, including HAZWOPER, spill response, bulk fuel facility operations, person in charge training for receiving fuel. We assist with maintenance and repair. We do fill line testing, pressure testing, inspections and non-destructive testing. EPA is now requiring non-destructive testing on a periodic basis for all tanks. Spill exercises, and we're an information resource. A lot of times people call and say, you know, my dispenser hose is out. I don't know where to get one. And so we'll be able to figure out what they need. We also work with communities on business planning and analysis. We do financial review and budget works, assist with pricing, credit and collections issues, decommissioned tank demolition, and now tank painting. So that gives you a little bit of background about what RAFS is. And like I say, we've been doing this for 12 years now. We're probably in about 80 villages a year, working one way or another, either with their tanks or doing training. So we have pretty broad experience in rural Alaska tank farms. So let's talk about some of the big issues. The biggest issue I think that we see is lack of training. We have every year fuel spills that are the result of human error. Just they don't have a person in charge who has been trained in how to deal with with receiving fuel. They don't walk the lines and check valves. They do not observe the max fill lines. And it kind of goes on and on. We have a spill recently in Cayana that was the result of a shared line. One operator had received their fuel, did not reset the valves. The next operator came in to receive fuel, didn't check the valves, and so essentially they filled an already full tank and dumped several thousand gallons into the containment. Same thing happened in Noatak a few years ago. Almost identical situation. People just not following procedures and being trained in how to receive fuel. So training is a huge deficiency. And it's complicated, thank you, complicated by the fact that turnover in these positions is very high. Like I say, we work with probably 80 communities a year, probably been in 120 or more over the last 10 years. I estimate the average tenure of a tank farm operator at about 9 months. So the training has to be continuous, and there needs to be good documentation so that a new person coming in can figure out what they're supposed to do, even what questions they're supposed to ask. We believe HAZWOPER training is very important. Despite all the new facilities, we see spills happen every year. Like I say, it is seldom, although not never, but seldom equipment failure. It is nearly always human error that creates the spills, and once you have a spill, knowing how to respond safely and effectively is a critical issue. Tank farm operator training, same thing. Like I mentioned with the turnover, the program that Avtech runs in Seward is an excellent program, but if your guy's only going to be there for 9 months, it's hard to keep sending people back to Seward, every 9 or 10 months to get the new people trained. So that's a big issue for us. The next is regulatory compliance. Now, what you're looking at here is an inspection report the Coast Guard did for one of our clients. Coast Guard didn't actually show up. They called and said, show me the documentation you have on your person in charge list to receive fuel. Is that current? What's the date on your FRP? Well, that's not current. I'm sorry. You got to send a new one in. Show me that you've had pipeline pressure testing done. And to make this more complicated, normally we do pneumatic pressure testing. That is, we use air to pressurize the pipe. But because it hasn't been done, they're requiring hydrostatic testing, which means you've either got to fill that pipeline with fuel or with water and pressurize it that way. And then they ask for evidence that they've had training and spill response exercises. And this particular entity couldn't provide any of that. So you've got a whole regulatory regimen that is going to create issues with the Coast Guard or the EPA or DEC, it's beginning to look like, if you don't pay attention to it. And it's a complex area that you just need to pay attention to, and you need to document. So we see this on a regular basis, and part of the inspection report says that all of these items have to be corrected prior to receiving fuel this summer. So it becomes then a timing issue too of great importance. All right, moving on. Next issue is just maintenance. We have so many new tank farms in rural Alaska that people have kind of taken the opinion that, it's going to be 50, it's a brand new tank farm. It'll be 15 years before we have to worry about it. Well, that's not what we're seeing. Tank farms that were put in the early 2000s now, especially along the coast, are showing significant rust. If they're not being treated right, painted and primed and kept current. AVEX adapting the standard that they want to paint their tank farms every 10 years. just to extend the life of the tanks and their facilities. So critical issue there. We see leaking valves, just gaskets that are bad, simple things. A lot of times people have a bucket under the valve and it's just leaking, and they say, well, you know, we'll get to it one of these days. It just is something that gets better, and if it's on a tested pipeline, then you're not going to pass a pressure test. So those are issues that have to be handled. Frost heave can be a big issue. We're currently working with a community whose fill line got hit by frost heave, and now instead of running kind of parallel to the ground, it sort of buckles up and down, and we're trying to figure out how to reset it so that it doesn't have the stresses on it that happen just from the frost heave. We've also seen communities that don't have flex hoses, and so as the tanks move with the ground, there's no give, and you can have a pipe pulled out of a tank. And in fact, several years ago, we had a community that had flex hoses, but they got frozen to the ground. And then there was a frost heave, and the hoses didn't move, but the tank did. And we ended up with 8,000 gallons of fuel in the containment there. So, and then finally, the other thing that we're paying a lot of attention to is decaying cribbing. People don't think about the wood under their tanks that's supporting those tanks, but we've got communities where there is an incredible amount of rot, and you just got to jack the tanks up and put new wood under it, or you're going to lose the tanks. So basic maintenance is a really important component of what we're looking at. And just as kind of one example of what I was talking about, if I can make it work. Am I? Where am I? Hello? There it is. This is the top of a tank of a Denali Commission tank farm. So it was put in within the last 12 or 15 years. That's my technician's foot. That's a rust spot on the top of that tank along that it's probably about 2 feet long. You've got this kind of corrosion going on in tanks all over the coastal areas. And if you're not paying attention, if you're not doing the right kind of grinding or sandblasting and priming and painting and getting the right kind of paint on, and it's damn expensive, you end up with tanks that can't be used. We actually worked on some older tanks here last summer and cleaned them on the inside and knocked the rust off, and discovered that without the rust holding the thing together, you could see through it. We were in Wales getting ready to paint a tank, and they knocked the rust off, and it happened to be a full tank. And I have pictures of one of my guys standing on a ladder with a funnel with a hose attached, catching the fuel as it's coming out while they figure out how to transfer enough fuel to get it below the hole that was in the tank. So this is stuff you really got to pay attention to, or you end up with big issues. Okay. And moving on, I think this is probably the last concern I have. Pricing and financial issues. And this applies both to your fuel price and your electric price, and in some cases to your water sewer price. People don't tend to look at the full cost of what operating a tank farm entails. And so I've had communities say, well, we've always added 25 cents to whatever the cost was of our fuel when we bought it, and that's what we've done for 20 years. Well, 25 cents doesn't cover your labor and your taxes and your insurance and your renewal and replacement fund and your training that's required and having somebody come in to pressure test your pipeline. And by the time you go through all that, you got to figure out how to raise your price sufficiently to cover your costs. And a lot of communities try to keep their price low in order to help the community, and what they discover is 3 years later they've run out of their reserves because they weren't charging enough, and now they can't purchase fuel because they don't have the down payment or they don't have the credit worthiness. And now you've got a real problem for your community. So we work with a lot of communities on establishing how to affect your prices, how you ought to calculate it, what items you ought to include, and you always ought to include some reserves, because you never know when somebody's going to run their four-wheeler into your fence and you got to replace the thing. So you need to build reserves. You don't know where the fuel price is going to be, so you need to be prepared if you get a big bump in your fuel price that you can adjust for that. And the same with your electricity. Basically, once you have your fuel price in place, then you got to look at how many kilowatt hours am I selling a year, and how do I allocate that fuel cost and all my other costs over the kilowatt hours I'm going to sell, so that I bring in enough revenue that I can pay off my fuel loan, and I can pay my people, and I can pay the IRS. I can't tell you how many communities we work with that have not paid their payroll taxes to the IRS because they didn't have the funds, and now the IRS is glomming onto their bank accounts. So knowing how to set your pricing is a key part of actually being able to do all the other things that I talked about in terms of maintaining your facility. So here's our contact information if you want to reach us. Like I said, my name is Conrad, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who needs some information. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, before I introduce myself, I'm curious to see who we've got in the audience. How many of you get your electricity from a diesel powerhouse? All right. Half, it looks like. How many of you get your heat for your house from a diesel fuel tank? All right, that's great. Well, that's why we're here. My name's David Lockard. I work for the Alaska Energy Authority. I've been there for 21 years. I ran the geothermal program, the solar energy program, about 30 tank farm projects, 8 powerhouse projects, 2 hydro projects. But believe it or not, my first love was tank farms. So I thought I'd throw this one up because people think there's no such thing as a pretty tank. And this is one of my favorites. So Adele kind of gave you the bad news. The good news I have is that Chloe's got good news. And in between is what I'm going to show you. The Denali Commission funded a survey last year it was essentially tank farm assessments for the communities at the top of the priority list, the ones that had received the least tank farm assistance in the past and were in the greatest need. So I managed that project, and I'm going to show you what we found out. Alaska Energy Authority has the mission of reducing the cost of energy in Alaska. We're an independent and public corporation of the state. Here's my outline, a little bit of history, talking about the assessment report we did last year. I've got some photos and information from 7 of the facilities at the top of our list, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the way we scored and created our priority list. So as far as history goes, a lot of the tank farms we run across in rural Alaska were originally built by the BIA for the schools that they built around the state. In some cases, the schools were where the communities eventually developed. And so we still run into tanks from that era. And they're called BIA tanks. A lot of you probably are familiar with that term. Those tanks were delivered nested, so they're all a little bit different sizes. A lot of them are 8, 7, 9,000 gallons. And they're vertical tanks, and a lot of them are still in use even though they're 30, 40, 50 years old, maybe even older. When I was hired in 94, AEA, which was the Division of Energy at the time, was doing tank farm repair work. We didn't have enough funding to actually build new tank farms, so we did a lot of sandblasting and painting of old tanks, and we replaced piping, valves, pumps. things like that, and did our best to bring the facilities into compliance with code requirements. That changed in 2000. Well, I guess I should mention, so there was a statewide assessment done in about 1990. I've never seen that information, but there was one done then. There was another one done in 98, which contributed to the Denali Commission plans for addressing bulk fuel needs in rural Alaska. Denali Commission funding started flowing in 99, 2000, and for the last 15 or 16 years, along with the partner AVEC, AEA has been building bulk fuel facilities around the state. We've completed about 78, AVEC's done 29 with Denali Commission and other funding. So this assessment report that I mentioned, we worked with 3 Alaskan engineering firms. They went to 57 communities around the state, and there were 242 bulk fuel facilities that were assessed. So what I've done is I've got photos from some of these top facilities, and the following photo has got the list of deficiencies, but since there's a lot of people in the audience who are familiar with tank farms, Mark, and others of you, Sandy, I'm wondering if anybody can tell me anything about this tank farm facility. No secondary containment. Anybody want to take a guess at how old that tank is? There's actually some clues in the picture. 60 years? I think it's probably older than that. It's actually probably older than that because in the US, welding was really introduced in the early 1900s, and they started converting railroad tank cars from riveted to welded in about 1920. So those tanks might be 90 years old. And they leak. And they have a variety of other deficiencies. Anybody else want to throw out, guess at some other deficiencies you see? Yep, emergency venting's not there. Exactly. Good call. All right. Well, here's the list. And this is not everything, but it's just kind of the primary things. There's a history of flooding, and this is a huge factor in a lot of the facilities that are at greatest risk in rural Alaska. And it's riverine and coastal flooding, and in many cases it's going to get worse. In fact, last year AEA relocated a tank farm that we built 8 years ago in Port Haydn because of coastal erosion, and I believe the peak coastal erosion that we measured was 140 feet a year. And where that tank farm was before we moved it last summer is not there anymore. It's gone. So it was last minute. Anyway, I won't read you all of these deficiencies. No fence, insufficient regulatory signs, no regulatory plans, no locks on the closed tank issue valves, spill response equipment not available. And so the recommendation from our consultant was to replace this facility. So here's another one. Anybody got any guesses? By the way, those are the BIA tanks I was talking about. I don't know if you can tell from there, but you can kind of tell that those tanks are slightly different sizes because they were delivered nested together, probably in the mid-1900s. Any guesses out there? Pardon? No, yeah, the containment's not there. The venting's probably not up to code. The fence doesn't look like it meets code. Let's see what the list looks like. Oh, it's another long one. History of flooding. Threatened by coastal erosion. No secondary containment. No tank foundations. Well, actually, I think I see some cribbing under those tanks, but if the cribbing's, yeah, it's 100 years old, but there's also a standard for the thickness of the cribbing. Mark, you remember what it is? Is it 12 inches? Yeah. So, yeah, and they're not anchored. Amazingly enough, have not seen many tall, skinny tanks that actually blew over or fell over, probably because most of them have fuel in them. But it's always a risk and something to consider when you're rehabilitating a tank farm. This one had active leaks, excessive tank corrosion, a lot of the same issues that the last one did. And the recommendation was to replace the facility. Does anybody sense a theme here? Yes, ma'am. The anchorage? Oh, egress. Oh, yeah, there's actually a requirement when you have a fenced facility that you have two places where you can get out of it. Say, let's just say you're working in a tank farm. Maybe there's a spill and the fuel catches fire. If it's between you and the exit, you've got a problem. So there's a requirement that there be two ways of getting out of the fenced-in area. Any other questions? Okay. Well, you can see these are similar types of tanks, similar issues. It's kind of hard to tell from here, but the secondary containment is not holding water there or holding liquid, and no fence. The venting looks like there's normal venting, but not emergency venting on those tanks. Let's see what the list looks like. Oh, another long one. History of flooding, threatened by coastal erosion, inadequate secondary containment, inadequate separation from buildings, no evidence of grounding. That's on the electrical system, and of course grounding's critical so that you don't get sparks. Recommendation is to replace the facility. That's kind of a small photo, but actually this is one of the more interesting ones. Can you guys see how the pipes are connected there to the red manifolding? Anybody know what that's called? Those fittings? I call them irrigation fittings because they're like a sprinkler system. But it's called a Victaulic fitting. And the ends of the pipe are flared, and then there's a rubber seal inside of that clamp that goes around the flared pipe ends, and those things always leak. In fact, they kind of act like flex fittings, because if you put a little bit of stress on the pipe bends right there, and then it leaks more. And you don't see very many Victaulic fittings anymore, but it's just guaranteed leaks in a manifold system. There's also something interesting about that valve. Anybody notice anything about that valve? Yep, it's brass or bronze, which means that it melts at temperatures below the temperatures you can get in a pool fire inside of a tank farm facility. So it's a code violation, because if there were a fire there and that valve melted, then all the fuel inside the tank would be released. I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a 2x4 holding up a pipe towards the back, so inadequate pipe supports, and I believe the secondary containment on this one was compromised. Let's see. Yep. There's a DEC requirement that bulk fuel facilities have to be more than 100 feet from a public well. I don't think there's a requirement for distance from a residential well, but in any case, this one was within 100 feet of a public well. Inadequate secondary containment, active leaks, missing fire extinguishers, spill response equipment not available, recommendation to replace the facility. I've only got a couple more of these. Anybody see anything in that one? Those tanks look a little bit better, although there's one that's got a big dent in it, which is also not uncommon. Tanks get moved around in the villages. What jumps out at me is the foundation on that white horizontal tank in the front. It's really important to keep tanks off the ground, because if you set them on the ground, the bottom will rust. And there's also code requirements for adequate foundations on the tanks. Inadequate secondary containment, failing tank foundation, missing emergency vents, active leaks, a lot of the same things we saw in the other ones. Was there a comment back there? Okay. And the recommendation was to replace the facility. Okay, I think this is the last one. You can see same kinds of issues with the foundation. The tank's not properly supported. Looks to me like there's no emergency venting. And having a hose permanently connected like that, it probably means the hose is full of fuel. And when hoses are left out in the sun, they don't last years and years like piping will. So that's an issue and a concern right there. This one, I believe, was next to an airport in an interior village, so they get fuel by air. The good thing about that is you need less storage because it doesn't have to be year-round. Was there a question or comment there? I don't actually remember which community that was. But there's two tanks here next to the airport. One's gasoline, one's diesel. And a similar long list of deficiencies. A lot of the ones you've seen before: improper valve material, missing regulatory documents, rubber hose in long-term use, and the recommendation was to replace the facility. So these photos and recommendations were part of the assessment report that we provided to the Denali Commission last fall. Oh, I forgot, there's one more. This must be the last one. A lot of the same kind of stuff. The piping system there is not properly supported. No fence. I don't see adequate emergency venting. Active leaks, missing pressure relief. So if you have a pipe system and valves on both ends, and you close the valves, and the pipe heats up like it might in the summertime if there's sunshine on it, you might go from minus 20 to 80 degrees or more in the interior. The fuel doesn't expand very much with heat, but it expands a little bit. And if there's no air in that pipe, something's got to give somewhere. What I usually see is there's a threaded connection in there somewhere, and that starts weeping. And so it'll cause leaks if you don't have pressure relief in the piping system. Missing regulatory documents. No locks on the gates because there are no gates. And the recommendation on this one was to repair the facility, paint the tanks, provide secondary containment, signage, regulatory documents, and fence, replace the piping, valves, vents, pumps, etc. It's possible that it would be cheaper to put in some double-wall tanks. I see Mark smiling over there. He's probably seen this kind of thing before. All right, I wanted to show you how we added up the points in the assessment reports. And a lot of these points are related to code issues, and then some of them are related to safety issues. They're also related to a lot of the common deficiencies we see in bulk fuel facilities. How am I doing for time? Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, less than 100 feet from a public well, you get some points for that. Within 25 feet of an eroding bank or beach. Gasoline tanks have to be more than 25 feet from an important building. That's a fire marshal requirement. Secondary containment is also a fire code requirement. And we see a lot of dikes that work somewhat, but not completely as well as they should. Foundations, we mentioned, there's 6-inch timbers is the specification in the code for for timbers under tanks, and actually you're not allowed to have any cribbing. There's also a limitation on how high the bottom of the tank can be off the ground. I think it's 12 inches. And there's issues with seismic hazards if the tanks are on unstable foundations. So you can kind of get a sense of what the points were that we assigned to the different facilities here. Here's the end of the scoring sheet. Piping is always a big issue. In fact, one of the things that's not obvious about bulk fuel facilities is even the really old tanks, those old BIA tanks that are covered with rust, they rarely leak. The leaks that we see are in the appurtenances, the pumps, the valves, the piping, and then, as Del mentioned, operator error is the most common source of spills and leaks. We added points for having rubber hose as part of the manifold system. Active leaks got 20 points. Wiring was one of the things that we inspected and assigned points for. And then down here at the bottom, a few of those facilities that you just saw pictures of actually got the high risk 40 points under life, health, and safety. And that's for situations like fire hazards, gasoline leaks, failing tanks, unstable foundations, and so forth. The maximum points was 240. Here's the scoring from the facilities that we looked at. We had 242 bulk fuel facilities. Maximum possible score was 240. The maximum score we found was 195. Average was 60, median was 50. Now there's actually some good news there, because what that means with a median of 50 and a maximum score of 195 is there's a lot of the facilities that don't need to be replaced, which is kind of going to lead into the next presentation. All right, let's see. So of the 57 communities we looked at and 242 facilities, there were 39 facilities where the consultant recommended replacing them, and 66 of them were environmentally threatened. And that's probably a soft number because, as you know, climate change is impacting bulk fuel facilities all over the state, all kinds of infrastructure all over the state, and we're not quite sure how quickly things are going to change. And then the range of capacities we looked at was a minimum of 1275 gallons, maximum of 412,000. I'm sorry, 412,000. So that range is the minimum size that EPA regulates, and the maximum is the threshold beyond which you run into DEC contingency plan requirements. And we don't typically get involved in facilities at that above that threshold. Okay, that's it.
Hi, I'm Chloe Cotton from the Denali Commission. I'm a program specialist at the Commission. I've worked there total for about 2 years now on the health program originally, and now on the bulk fuel under the energy program. So first, just a little bit of background about what the Denali Commission is. We were created back in 1998 by Congress as a coordinating agency designed to bring infrastructure in rural Alaska up to the standards of the rest of the United States. And we were modeled after regional commissions in the lower 48, but we're unique in that we only serve Alaska, whereas these other regional commissions serve often 6, 7 states, I believe. We're comprised of 7 commissioners, including a federal co-chair, Joel Niemeyer, and a state co-chair who is designated by the governor and is currently our lieutenant governor, Byron Malott. And we were designed as a small agency specifically so that we could avoid some of the bureaucracy that comes along with the federal government, and to really focus on coordinating other agencies and convening them and kind of bridging gaps and filling gaps, aiming at solving some of the problems that face infrastructure in rural Alaska. So over the last 17 years, we've invested over $1 billion of federal funds matched with local, state, philanthropic, and other federal funding into rural Alaska. There's a list here of some of the main programs that we focused on. That includes about $500 million in energy projects, half in bulk fuel, half in power system upgrades, about $300 million in health projects, which are clinics, behavioral health centers, some domestic violence centers, $120 million for roads, docks, and mooring points under the transportation program. And then we've also invested about $47 million into training programs. And you can see the variety of different training there, and that has included some bulk fuel training in the past. It's something we haven't done as much recently, but as you'll hear about later, we're working on getting back into focusing on bulk fuel training specifically. So the Denali Commission's bulk fuel program is one of our legacy programs. It was something we were charged with addressing when we were initially founded. When we were first created in the 90s, a lot of tank farms were in such bad repair, as David kind of referred to, that they were there was a genuine fear that the Coast Guard would go ahead and shut them down, and communities would no longer be able to store fuel in them. So we were founded to try and stop that. Over the last 17 years, we've constructed over 100 fuel storage facilities with our program partners, AEA and AVEC. We originally prioritized based on this 1999 inventory that we did, and we started with the very worst facilities, or the overall communities that had the worst facilities there, and just went down that list over the years, replacing, in almost every case, completely the tank farm infrastructure there with really gold standard facilities in each of these communities. So over the last, especially about 5 or 6 years, the Denali Commission's funding has declined, and that has affected the bulk fuel program, along with the rest of our programs. From a high of 40 million, we've now leveled off at about 4 million a year. So that's a big change. A lot of the tank farm projects that we do in current dollars cost anywhere from 4 million to, we just got an estimate for one community's tank farm upgrades would be over $10 million. So that's 2.5 years of our budget. And we, realizing that we've leveled off at about 4 million, decided that our current way of allocating funding was no longer an effective way to help address the problems that rural Alaskans are facing when it comes to bulk fuel storage infrastructure. And you can see on this chart, just back in 03-04, we were finishing 15 to 16 facilities a year. Now we're down to between 1 and 4, depending on just the construction cycle. So with that in mind, this need to sort of change our approach, we funded the inventory through the Energy Authority. Those 56 communities have a total of 241 tank farms. David summarized most of those results for you, but the main takeaway is there's still a lot of need in rural Alaska for upgraded bulk fuel facilities. And this inventory provided us with a new prioritization to update that one from 1999. But it identified, as you saw, a lot of the basic problems with these, but it doesn't provide necessarily, here's the design for your next project. So it's a starting point and it's a prioritization, and now we're taking steps to move forward from there. I had planned to talk a little bit about some of the other difficulties facing tank farms, although I think David and Del have really summed them up very well. The one that I will point out is number 4 on this list, the inactive and abandoned tank farms. Del and RAFs have really taken the lead on this issue, actually. There are, I think, estimated around 1,200 to 2,000 empty tanks, or hopefully empty tanks. A lot of them are not actually empty in rural Alaska, that some were left behind when the commission came in and built a new facility, or other funders did the same. And so on top of all of the facilities that are currently in use and are needing improvements, we do have this whole other category of inactive tank farms that are also out there and need to be dealt with in some way. So over the last year or so, the commission has had a lot of discussions with our program partners, AEA and AVEC, with the regulators, U.S. Coast Guard, EPA, and DEC, as they're looking to consider regulating small tank farms. One idea that we've looked at very seriously and we're moving towards implementing is life extension projects instead of full replacements. We did this in Scammon Bay, I think it was 2013, and you can see the photo on the left is the original facility, the photo on the right is the upgraded one. We partnered with AVEC in this case to refurbish these tanks for a total of about $900,000 instead of the several million that it would have cost to do a full replacement. And AVEC has also kind of been pioneering this for their own tank farms. They've been doing life extension projects at a cost of around $500,000 for a facility that to do a full replacement would be several $1 million. And kind of on a smaller scale, we've looked at maintenance and improvement projects. So when David pulled up the photos of those tank farms showing all of the issues. These would be designed to address some of the smaller issues there. So can we put in a fence? Can we install secondary containment at a somewhat reasonable price? Clean and paint tanks, kind of basic things that are not going to extend the life of the facility by a whole lot, but will hopefully make it safer to use, and maybe stop some leaks from occurring. So based off all the discussions that we've had over the last year, we've come to the conclusion we really want to focus on what are the gaps that we can fill. There are a lot of agencies that currently work in bulk fuel storage. We don't want to be duplicating what anyone else is doing. And so this summer, what we're planning on using our funding for is funding 5 letter reports, we're calling them, for communities that will outline options for refurbishment or smaller maintenance and improvement projects. The hope is that these reports will come back for each facility with maybe 2 or 3 different options that then we can make an informed decision of, is it worth the $4 million to extend the lifespan, to do a full upgrade, extend the lifespan for 5 years, or for 40 years, excuse me, or is $500,000 that will extend it for 10 to 15 a better investment of our funds at this point. We'll also be working with Avtech to fund the construction of a demonstration tank farm at their training facility in Seward. They, as Del mentioned, they do a training there twice a year, a 2-week-long program for bulk fuel operators that AEA funds, and they do not have a tank farm currently to work on. They just have a couple 50-gallon tanks, and so we are going to try and improve the facilities there so that the operators that attend are getting a better learning experience. And then we'll also be this summer providing gap funding to a tank farm project to ensure that it's fully funded. So that's an instance of us making sure that we're filling gaps and having our money go farther. And then our continued investments into the future, we do want to continue focusing on construction. That is one of the things the commission has always done and has been important. We're going to continue to fund these letter reports to give us options for smaller repair projects so that we can touch a larger number of communities. And then we're also going to look at collaborating with new partners, or new collaborations, sometimes with old partners, with the Energy Authority. And all of these are in kind of preliminary talks, and so we're developing specifically what those would look like. But with the Energy Authority, we'll be looking at expanding the training that they do through Avtech to include a local training component. We are talking with the State Division of Community and Regional Affairs about how we can use the resource and the infrastructure that they've already established through DCRA, or through the LGS program and RUBA, to have the local government specialists also help out bulk fuel tank farm administrators as well as the utility administrators. And then we'll be working with the Alaska Community Foundation to set up funds to make it easier, hopefully, for tank farm owners to save money. As Del mentioned, it's really important that we get tank farm owners to be saving funds for long-term repair projects and potentially eventual replacement. And so the commission will be helping to cover some of the costs of those savings accounts through the Community Foundation in an effort to help more communities make the decision to sign up for those. I'm definitely willing to take any questions. Yes?
Earlier you mentioned about how you're going down the list of trying to fix or repair some of the older or worn out tanks. Do you have a website where I can go check to see if my village is on the list?
I don't have it on our website, but if you want to come talk to me after the presentation, I can get you that information. Yes. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, I'm on the village developer, and we are on the list, and I think we ended up in the 20s, and because I was at the Denali Commission earlier, a couple months ago, we sat down and looked at that, and the problem is there's information information that wasn't included last year when you guys did the assessment about like the seismic activity we're having in Lockard. There's not a line item for that. That gets us points. And there's also, there was one other issue besides our seismic activity, but that weren't in the, in the criteria for grading. And so I have an issue with that on behalf of our village because I don't think our tank farm assessment is properly formulated for the situation that now exists within our village.
So I will say I know no prioritization process is perfect. I know David was a little more involved in the specific development of those points, but I will add, instead of ranking by community, what we've done is switch to ranking by facility. So our old method had been to take the average of every tank farm within a community and weight those based on the size of that tank farm and come up with an overall community score. And then we would go to the community that had the highest number of points. What we've switched to is just taking the facility. So that the one that David mentioned that had 195 points, that facility is at the top of the list, along with all of the other facilities within that community. And I don't have the list in front of me, but actually I believe that No Attack had a facility that is ranked very highly on the individual facility list. Yeah, and so this won't address concerns with the prioritization process, but I think that because we switched to the prioritization by facility, No Attack actually is much further up the list than.
It's just for one of our facilities, because we have 3 separate tank farms. Oh, that was the other thing, is that the airport, or the tank farm that the school district uses, which is owned by the borough, is actually in the flight pad. And FAA, or the DOT, basically condemned it and gave us the 2021 to remove it from that site. So that's another issue that wasn't taken into consideration in the creation of that report. And then those 2 tanks with the hose in and out, that's the village tank farm reception for when we have air brought, fuel brought in by air. And those were those 2 tanks. But then the AVAC tank farm, which is sitting on the edge of our river with the recent seismic activity. And I've been making a lot of waves the last year trying to get that development before we end up with a spill in our river. We're a subsistence-based community, so we're talking about the future livelihood of our community if we end up having a spill.
And actually, you've been doing a great job of making waves because you've been heard. I've heard it, the Denali Commission heard it, and AVAC's heard it too. One thing I didn't say that hasn't been mentioned is that AVAC is actually pursuing, I can't remember if it's FEMA or there's another federal source of funding.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm aware that they are seeking funding through there, and I'm seeking funding through FEMA and the state hazardous mitigation to remove 2 tanks that are by our local store.
Yeah. Well, and if you'd like to follow on, I'd be happy to talk to you. I have some ideas about things that might be done to improve, reduce the risk that you mentioned of those tanks falling in the river. Yeah. It certainly is a very serious risk. The facilities, there's 240 facilities on the list, so the ones at the top 50 or so, they are in really bad condition. And I think you would get some competition from other communities saying, well, our tanks are just as bad as yours.
Right, but I'm here, all right? Yes. And you know what? I care about mine more than I care about yours, unfortunately, not to be selfish. And that's my hope.
Well, we've done a great job of bringing that issue, that concern to the agencies that are involved. I'd be happy to be with you in my office and talk about more options. And you are close to the top list. The fact that you turned up in my photo, at least one of the tank farms in No Attack did, means you're in the top 7.
Thank you.
So, if you were
welcome to send me the information. I'm not sure we're going to change the priority list at this point, but one of the things that's happening, and Chloe said this well, it's a new world. It's a new universe in tank farm upgrades in rural Alaska. For 17 years, people have been built doing the whole community at one time in most places, we have, and the facilities cost $2 to $10 million. Mark's been heavily involved in that. He's with Hattiesburg Hilly. We've had 4 consultants working for us, and AVEX had a number working for them. That world is gone. There's not $20, $40 million a year to spend on tank farms anymore. So the Denali Commission's new approach, which we explained, of in some cases repairing or painting old tanks instead of replacing them, is a way to make the money go further. My agency is also helping communities identify a variety of sources of funding. We used to do things with ICDBG money, CDBG money, loans, financing. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is, for example, if you replace a utility tank farm and you get a grant for it, it doesn't doesn't change PCE. But if you get a loan for a utility tank farm, and that's an eligible cost, the loan payments are an eligible cost under PCE, it can actually increase your PCE payment. So the PCE picks up a part of the cost of your facility. A lot of people haven't thought about that in the past. I never thought of it before. You know what? It's a new world. And so we can work with you to try to find sources of funding and address the facilities that you're most concerned about.
Well, you mentioned, that was interesting, that decommissioning existing tank farms came up in your slide. In the past, that hasn't always been a priority, I guess not a priority, and we're all worried about how far we can stretch the money to build a new facility, and the other commission would be hesitant to pay for the decommissioning of existing particular facilities. Is that changing the wind, or is that going to start being more commission funds?
It's definitely something we are focusing somewhat more on. We don't have any funding in FY16 dedicated specifically to that, but in instances where we're already in a community working on upgrading a facility there or replacing a facility there, then in those instances we would definitely strongly consider decommissioning the tank farms within that community. And in the future, it's something we may consider on a broader scale, but it's not currently in our work plan.
Are there any other questions? We have about 15 minutes left. Doesn't look like it. Well, with that, thank you, Chloe, Dell, David. Great presentations. And again, housekeeping items. Yeah, one more round of applause for all of them.